Hello and welcome back to the Movie Motel Show. Today, we're talking about the Hobbit trilogy. This is a divisive subject. Those that liked The Lord of the Rings might not necessarily have liked The Hobbit. Those that liked The Lord of the Rings might also like The Hobbit. And then for some reason, some people think it's okay to say they prefer The Hobbit. So let's take ourselves back about 10 years, and The Hobbit is in production. And at this point, it's 2 movies. Now let's all remind ourselves that Tolkien's book, The Hobbit, is 1 book. The original Lord of the Rings trilogy was 3 books, 3 movies. But for some reason, the producers of this film thought it was a good idea to take 1 book and turn it into 2 movies.
But it's 127 days and it's 2 films. Now, I've got a 133-day Lord of the Rings jumper, which was for 3 films.
Yes.
So 133 days for 3 films and 127 days for 2 films.
Yes, easily explained.
How?
Well, we're all 10 years older, so we're going a little slow.
That's true.
Guillermo del Toro was meant to direct this movie. He actually got quite far into pre-production, a lot of designing, a lot of script work, and then he's like, nah, don't want to do this anymore, drops out. Peter Jackson, director of the original trilogy, was just meant to be a producer, and I think he had a hand in the writing. He was like, oh shit, this is a bit inconvenient. Who we're going to find at the last minute? Producers like, well, you directed the first trilogy. Everybody loved that. You won a lot of Oscars, remember? Lots of Oscars. Peter Jackson's like, yeah, I did. I could do it again, probably. And look, I've lost all this weight now. I'm healthy. I'm taking care of myself. So why not spend 2 years making a movie? Let's do it. And then by the end of it, he looks like this. Poor guy.
You get tired. I always just tell people I get exhausted at the end of the first couple of days and stay exhausted.
But I feel really bad for him because, he wasn't planning on directing this movie. He was planning on just taking care of himself and producing it from the sides. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh shit, I've got probably a month to prepare before filming begins. And then the next probably 3 years was non-stop work on this trilogy. Non-stop. Without being prepared. Can you imagine that? I'm sure the paycheck was good, but was it worth it? If the paycheck was good, probably, yeah. Peter's stepped in now, and he's started doing rehearsals. They've built most of the sets. They're just going through, the routine, how they're going to stage some of the scenes, fight choreography, costume tests, and they have to replace one of the dwarves. Rob Kaczynski was originally on set to play Philly. You can see him here. He's on set. He's rehearsing. He's learning the fight choreography, learning how to ride a horse. And then I'm pretty sure he had some sort of injury. That's as production's beginning. They've already started filming, and they've got to switch out a director, and then they've got to switch out one of the actors too. As filming goes on, towards the end, they decide to switch out Azog for a CGI version. Now this last-minute switches, last-minute rewrites, is something that's quite common.
I remember it now, but later on. I didn't have a script until I got here, but that's part of the nature of working with Pete anyway.
New lines here.
So I kind of knew that that's what would be the situation.
Did you have another meeting outside?
No, the meeting we had was this morning. I just learnt those lines.
This is the result of the
Quick, let's film it now.
The creative team decided over lunch that they wanted him to do an Elvish scene that afternoon.
Brett, you've got some Elvish. He said, you were joking. I said, no, and it's 3 lines, and it's going to be shot in 1 shot, so we can't cut in and out of it. And he went a bit pale.
We're going to shoot straight up.
So stressful. Yeah, because being on set is a very stressful atmosphere, even when you're speaking English.
Compared to the first movie, where probably 90% of the movie was practical. Outdoors locations, real forests, real mountains. This movie, like, I can understand why Mirkwood would need to be a fake set, but even Mirkwood could have been filmed in a real forest. And I don't think the weird Instagram filter works very well to hide the fact that it's all fake. And what's more, the orcs are probably 90% CGI as well. But in the original trilogy, I think the orcs were 99% practical. So it's like completely flipped. And it shows. It looks like a video game cutscene already, and it's only been 10 years. And this film was shot in like, I think it was 8K, 48 frames per second, 3D on digital cameras. That doesn't matter if most of your film is CGI. The main 2 orcs, Azog the Defiler and his son Bolg, were originally created, designed, built, and filmed as practical orcs. This is Bolg. As you can see here, there's an action figure that proves it. This is terrifying and would have been so cool in the movie. But a decision was made to make Azog CGI so that they could make him bigger, I guess.
Azog was one of the last characters on The Hobbit to get design approval. Originally cast as an actor in prosthetics, Peter Jackson decided Azog needed to really stand out from the rest of the orcs, so Azog became the 7-foot pale orc that we see in the film.
So then once they made him CGI, they realized it would be weird if the other orcs were all practical and he was the only CGI one. So they decided to make them all CGI. And I think that was one of the worst decisions they made on this film. Also, going back to the green screen, famously Ian McKellen had a breakdown on set. They often have to film Ian McKellen's scenes separate to the actors playing the dwarves, because it's harder to cheat it in camera, so it's easier just to film them separately and put them together afterwards. But that meant that Ian McKellen had to do a lot of scenes, especially in Bag End at the beginning of the film. He had to do a lot of scenes in a separate room, and apparently he just hated that.
Often I have to be in a different studio to the smaller people. People have to look smaller.
Right.
With cameras that are enslaved, moving at exactly the same rate, but I can only hear the other actors through an earpiece, and I can't see them. I have to pretend to see them.
So that's got to be...
that's miserable.
Yeah, that's got to be a very...
Other times we actually do get to be in the same room, but we must not look at each other.
Halfway through filming, the producers decided to take 1 book, 2 movies into 1 book, 3 movies. So the trailer that we saw for a movie that was going to come out in 2012 didn't even feature footage from that movie, because a lot of those scenes were pushed into the next movie, movie number 2, which was going to be called There and Back Again, but they changed the name to Desolation of Smaug. Or is it Smog? No one knows.
With Smaug.
Smaug.
So that footage that was pushed into film number 2 padded out film number 2 even more, leaving like a little bit of footage left over to make a 3rd movie with, but not quite enough footage to make a full 3rd movie. So the producers were like, hey, why don't you just invent some new scenes that aren't in the book, that are all to do with Legolas? Because people like Legolas, right? Everyone likes Legolas. So let's just put him in the movie more and pad out that last movie even more, so we make even more money. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is money, people. Because not only did these movies make billions, fair enough, they didn't win Oscars like the original trilogy, but it made a lot of money. But these movies were also shot in 3D. And 3D isn't really used much anymore because no one really cares about it, and it doesn't really make a movie any better. But this was 2012, it was still a thing. With 3D, ticket prices are double, which means you can make even more money. Also, they shot it at 48 frames per second. No one asked for this. People complained it was making them nauseous. And they shot with digital cameras that made the footage really desaturated. So they had to, in the makeup process and in the set design, they had to put extra colour on everything, because if not, there'd be no colour on the footage. So they had to extra colourize everything. After doing all that, they put this horrendous, disgusting grey filter over everything. So all that beautiful colour, all that work the costume department had done and the set designers to make all this beautiful detail just has like an Instagram filter on it, and all the highlights are blown out. It looks awful. And if you put a scene from The Hobbit next to a scene from the original, they look nothing alike. There's no coherence between the two trilogies. I think it's mostly because the original trilogy means so much to me from like a filmmaking point of view and from a childhood growing up, nostalgia. They're just good movies. And then these came out and there was a lot of hype, and I was hyped, especially from that first trailer. And then I watched it. First one wasn't so bad. Second one, I was like, there's a little bit too much CGI in the second one. Third one is pretty much the entire movie is shot on a green screen. I hate it. Also, a point about the third movie, the Battle of the Five Armies. In the book, the battle takes place over like one paragraph or something. Like, it's glossed over so quick.
The battle's, it's only about 5 pages long. There's only one chapter that really covers off the whole battle.
Now, what I liked about the original is that almost all of the sets were real, practically built sets. Some of them were even built on top of little mountains. Some were miniature sets, and then slightly bigger versions of those miniature sets so they could move the camera inside it. And some were full-size, actual, legit castles that they built out in the wilderness of New Zealand. The country of New Zealand was essentially the film set of Lord of the Rings. Now, in An Unexpected Journey, it's early in the production. They think they're only making 2 movies at this point, so they're building these sets. They're taking their time. They're flying the crew and the cast in 15 helicopters like it's a scene from Apocalypse Now up onto these mountains to film these crazy scenes with incredible views.
So this is my favourite location. It's beautiful. There's a mountain, there's a waterfall, there's a beautiful view across a valley there. It's one of those sort of archetypal Kiwi places that you think, God, New Zealand has such amazing landscapes.
By the second movie, you start to see more and more green screen because they're running out of time. There's time crunches. They're running out of, space. They're trying to squeeze all these extra scenes in so they can make this extra movie, so everything has to be cut down. It's all on green screens now. Only half the set is built, and it's built inside a soundstage. By the third one, like, all these pickups they're doing and extra filming and extra scenes that they're cramming in, they're just entirely on a green screen. And I hate it. Peter Jackson admitted himself that it was going to be challenging having 13 dwarf characters.
13 dwarves is one of the reasons why I dreaded The Hobbit, and why I really didn't think I was going to make it for such a long time. But the irony is it's turned out to be one of the joys.
They all get their own little scenes, and you can kind of get to know each of their characters. But then in the second movie, and bear in mind, Peter Jackson just admitted that it was a challenge having 13 dwarf characters. And then you've got Gandalf, Bilbo, Elrond, and whoever else shows up in the first movie. Then in the second movie, they introduce more characters. Now you've got Tauriel, Legolas, Bard, Smaug, all these extra characters now. So you've almost double the amount of characters, but you still haven't fully fleshed out those characters from the first movie. Now in the second one, you've got even more characters now. And I know we already know Legolas from the first trilogy, but... oh, also his dad's here now. And his dad's a big deal. So many people. Guess what happens in the third movie? Most of the dwarves get killed off without really having any sort of arc. I remember watching the third one, and I'm pretty sure at least 5 of the dwarves don't have a spoken line of dialogue in that entire movie. I could be wrong. They might have, like, words. A line. But you know what I mean. In that movie, the side character dwarves, forget them. Just forget them in that movie. Gone. Who cares about them anymore? The problem with having Legolas is, and this is no fault of Orlando Bloom, he can't help that he's grown older. You know, it was 10 years in between the last time he was on Lord of the Rings and then returning for The Hobbit. He was around 10 years. He's got older in those 10 years, you know? He made the Pirates of the Caribbean movies in that time and that Three Musketeers movie. He looks different. He was in his early 20s when he did The Lord of the Rings. And then you look at him in The Hobbit and you can tell the difference. And bear in mind, The Hobbit is a prequel by a significant amount of time. It's interesting that no one really thought, oh, Orlando doesn't look like how he looked back then. He looks older, and his face looks different. And he's kind of acting different too. He doesn't really act like Legolas acted. Legolas was always a side character. Doesn't matter how much you love him, he was a side character in the Fellowship. Aragorn was the main dude in their group. Legolas and Gimli were his sidekicks. In this movie, they give him all these action scenes, they give him all this extra stuff to do, and he was always a badass, but it just didn't seem like the same person. The first movie was finished just hours, and I'm talking hours, before the premiere, because they were still working on shots. The VFX department was still editing the movie as they were setting up for the premiere. That's how rushed and chaotic the production was. By the time Comic-Con came around for the second movie, they were intending on showing footage from the Desolation of Smaug at Comic-Con that year. But because of the hectic production and suddenly needing to film extra stuff for the third movie, they couldn't go to Comic-Con. There was no time to go to Comic-Con. They couldn't have a break from filming, or they wouldn't get the films finished in time. As you can see here, as Peter Jackson's telling us about this, you can just see how exhausted he is. And he still has one more movie to make after this. They had to reshoot the scenes on the river, which is just after they've escaped in the barrels. Originally, when they were filming this, a storm, a flash flood, caused them to abruptly stop filming and evacuate. This is completely fine. This was to, protect the cast and crew and get everyone out of danger. But then, a few months later, they had to go back and reshoot these scenes, film extra stuff that they couldn't finish filming that day. So rather than going back to that same river with the cast and crew and setting everything up again and refilming that scene, I guess to save time and money, they just completely rebuilt the river on a green screen. And you can tell in the movie which shots are the original shots from when they were at the river and which shots are on a green screen.
It will look exactly the same, I promise you, when you see it in the movie.
And remember, this is super high quality 8K footage, 48 frames per second. So when something doesn't look right, you can tell it doesn't look right. Bringing all the cast and crew back to shoot all these extra scenes and reshoots of previous scenes that needed to change slightly to fit into the narrative of having a third movie, and just in general shooting extra stuff, created a lot of problems for the production. They had to rebuild a lot of the sets that they previously dismantled because they thought they'd finished filming, including Lake Town, which Luke Evans says is the 5th time it's been built to shoot on. John Bell, who plays Bad's son, Luke Evans' son in the movie, in the time between when they wrapped originally and then came back for the reshoots, he just grew because he's just a teenager, so he just kept growing. So he was like a shoulder height boy against Luke Evans before, and then they came back after a few months break, and now he's like the same height as Luke Evans. They only had 10 weeks to do all these reshoots as well. So as if things weren't hectic enough, now they have a time constraint of only 10 weeks to film enough extra footage to make a third movie out of. And you can understand, with only 10 weeks, why the production wouldn't want to keep moving the cast and crew out across the islands to film in the wilderness. You know, because that's time consuming. Every time you move the cast, there has to be like double the amount of crew that go with them, maybe even triple the amount of crew. And all those crew need their own kind of workstations and power and food and water, and the cast need their trailers and makeup and things like that. And all that has to be moved every time they want to change location. And a movie like this that's so epic, there's lots of different locations. So you can see why, when they only have 10 weeks left to film, that they would just keep it all, you know, into the sound stages. But unfortunately, you know, that really did have a negative effect on the overall quality of the finished product, especially that last movie. Because of all this chaos, a lot of the time Peter Jackson couldn't even direct all the scenes himself. They actually shot 2 units simultaneously. Now, that's not uncommon for movies to have a second unit, but usually second unit just goes out and films things like helicopter shots of the environment. They're not necessarily shooting footage with the actors. That's usually just reserved purely for the director. But this production being the way it was, in the first movie, Andy Serkis had to step up and direct scenes. It started with second unit stuff, so helicopter stuff, but then he ended up filming fight scenes and like actual big scenes in the movie. And then, as the production went on, Andy Serkis became too busy, so Peter Jackson had to enlist one of his crew members and longtime collaborator Christian Rivers to shoot some scenes. And again, big scenes with actors in them doing dialogue, doing important things. Peter Jackson couldn't even do those. He's too busy. So he had to leave it to a VFX guy. This guy, Christian Rivers, ended up directing Mortal Engines a few years later. And Mortal Engines is an absolute garbage movie. At the end of The Desolation of Smaug, a song by Ed Sheeran plays. I don't mind the barrel sequence, it's kind of fun, but there is this one shot where the camera goes to like a GoPro camera. Why? They have an underwater camera that they built for it that could shoot with the digital cameras in 8K. Why did they cut to footage from a GoPro? I don't know. I hate the scene in the Goblin Tunnels, especially this particular shot of Gandalf and the dwarves pushing like a big boulder. The CGI is just awful. They look like they're just floating across the ground. They have no weight to them. Doesn't look like their feet are even touching. The timing's all off. It's just really bad. And then the scene where they're on like the wooden platform and it collapses and they somehow all survive is just really bad as well. Dumb scenes like that wouldn't have taken place in the original trilogy. The original trilogy was super serious, and I know The Hobbit is meant to be a little bit more family friendly, a little bit more light and funny, but come on. The stuff with Gollum's great. Andy Serkis, you know, he made a name for himself by playing that character. You know, so that stuff's great. Martin Freeman's not bad. It's great to see the Shire again. They rebuilt the whole thing because back in when they finished wrapping the original trilogy, they dismantled the whole set. They took it all away because it was still belonged to a farmer. Subsequently, that farmer now uses that land as like an open-air museum, like a tourist attraction. So when the production came back for The Hobbit, they rebuilt the set, but this time they rebuilt it as a permanent set. So it's like a real museum tourist attraction. All those Hobbit holes are there permanently now. So when tourists show up, they can go inside. So maybe you liked the Hobbit trilogy. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you think Lord of the Rings trilogy is supreme, which it is. I recommend going on YouTube and finding Peter Jackson's production diaries.
Hello, welcome to the first of our blogs on the making of The Hobbit. It's amazing to be back here again.
I think there's 1 to 14, I think in total. They're about 10 minutes long. And they're a great, insightful way into what went on behind the scenes. You know, you can really see the change from the beginning. Everybody's happy, everybody's having fun. Peter Jackson's looking great. And then towards, you know, the end of those diaries, when they just kind of abruptly stop, they don't make any more after those because production just got too crazy for everyone. You can see the difference. So I highly recommend watching those, whether you are a fan or not. Just watch them, respect the art form, respect the hard work that the crew and the cast put into those movies. And appreciate the fun that they all had as well. Maybe it's just the Kiwi spirit, but it seems like everybody had a really good time on set. Even Ian McKellen. So, there we go, guys. That's the end of today's video. I hope you liked it. If you did, drop it a like. Consider subscribing. If you check the links below, you'll find Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and most importantly, Twitch. I stream on Twitch, usually around 4 times a week. I'm playing Skyrim right now, so if you're into Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Skyrim's pretty similar. Come say hi, and I'll say hi back. And I will catch you next time. Thanks for watching.